We start with some breaking news. Following days of bipartisan scrutiny, another failure for the ever-chaotic White House vetting process. Donald Trump's embattled pick for Director of National Intelligence, Congressman John Ratcliffe, is now withdrawing his nomination. That announcement after the president spent the better part of his week fighting off legitimate questions about the congressman's lack of experience, his padded resume, and his partisanship, not exactly desired characteristics for a person up for the nation's top intelligence job. Here was the announcement from the president a short while ago on Twitter, quote, "Our great Republican Congressman John Ratcliffe is being treated very unfairly by the lamestream media. Rather than going through months of slander and libel, I explained to John how miserable it would be for him and his family to deal with these people. John has therefore decided to stay in Congress, where he has done such an outstanding job representing the people of Texas and our country. I will be announcing my nomination for DNI shortly." This, of course, a big reversal from what the president had said about Ratcliffe just 24 hours ago.
Congressman Ratcliffe is an outstanding man, and I'm sure that he'll be able to do very well. I think he's just outstanding, highly respected by everybody that knows him.
And the president actually just a few seconds ago finished talking with reporters on the South Lawn of the White House. We're going to bring you those comments. He did get into this subject of John Ratcliffe quite a bit. We'll bring you those comments when we can. For his part, meanwhile, Ratcliffe, who hours before his nomination was on Fox News suggesting there may have been a criminal conspiracy surrounding the Russia investigation, he wrote this on Twitter, quote, "I do not wish for a national security and intelligence debate surrounding my confirmation, however untrue, to become a purely political and partisan issue. The country we all love deserves that it be treated as an American issue. Accordingly, I have asked the president to nominate someone other than me for this position." And here to bring us all through all the details on this at the table with us, we have former Republican Congressman from Pennsylvania, Ryan Costello, another former Republican Congressman, now an independent, David Jolly from Florida, Washington Post senior congressional correspondent, Paul Kane, a former colleague of mine at Roll Call, by the way, along with White House reporter for the Daily Beast, Asawin Subsang, and former assistant director for counterintelligence at the FBI, Frank Figliuzzi. Thanks to everybody for being with us. Asawin, let me just start with you. We played the president 24 hours ago, seemed to have full faith in this nomination. Now the plug has been pulled. What happened between then and now?
Well, the president of the United States, as you showed in the tweet to your audience, is blaming the quote-unquote lamestream media and what the potentially negative news coverage would possibly do to Representative Ratcliffe during a testy nomination process. But the president has been absorbing coverage of this for the past 24 hours and several days before that, and he's noticed that it hasn't just been the media and Democrats that have been laying into Ratcliffe and his supposed shortcomings or lack of qualifications on his resume. It's been Republicans as well. There has not been this outpouring of warmth or support or love for Ratcliffe from Republicans on Capitol Hill, including from reliable Trump allies on this issue. And the president of the United States, our sources are telling us at the Daily Beast, has taken note of that, and it seriously contributed to him pulling this nomination.
So Paul Kane, get into that. This was a position that needed confirmation in the Senate. Republicans have 53. That means it doesn't take many Republicans defecting to kill a nomination. Is that what was going to happen here?
Yeah, Joe Manchin told us, and Joe Manchin is the most moderate centrist of all Democrats. He told us right away he was voting no, he was opposed, he didn't think he had the right qualifications. So that means you're looking at a pool of 53 Republicans. There was just almost nobody creating any echo chamber of support. Todd Young, who served in the House for 4 years with Ratcliffe, who these two know well, Todd Young, asked by one of my colleagues about him, said, "I don't know him." If that's the kind of support you're going to get, that shows you where the nomination was headed in the Senate.
We have two former Republican members. Did you know him?
Know him, served with him, came in with him. His office was right across from mine. I like him. He's hardworking. He's smart. I would add, though, as the political dynamic is this, I think. You have your Mueller hearings in the House. This nomination, if it goes to the Senate, just brings that entire, it's like an entree for Senate Democrats to play whack-a-mole on the nomination as well, which to John Ratcliffe's point or tweet, it will be entirely political in the Senate if he were to go forward with confirmation.
Frank, the other question here, too, is just about this position itself, Director of National Intelligence. Talk it through, because I think it has a reputation as being, at least in design, a little bit above, a little bit separate from the normal partisan political fray, which means that, again, at least in theory here, folks looking at this from a confirmation standpoint are looking for somebody who's going to seem a little less political than your average nominee.
Yeah, Stephen, for that, you're right. And for that reason, we need to chalk this up in the win column for the American people and for truth and the intelligence community, because you're right. It's a post 9/11 created position to coordinate about 17 intelligence agencies and have them all rowing in the same direction. He sets collection priorities. He speaks truth to the White House and the National Security Council and Congress. And so it's a critical position, especially in these times when we are literally under attack by foreign adversaries. Deep threat, broad threat. We need somebody with deep intelligence experience. This was not that guy. And so I chalk this up as a rare win for the right thing being done. And the fact that Republicans also were looking askance at this nomination, I think we need to applaud.
You mentioned the name here, John Ratcliffe, I think was new to a lot of folks just in the last couple of weeks. Obviously, the announcement of this nomination, and then right before that, it was his questioning of Robert Mueller at those hearings. Certainly caught the attention, apparently, of the administration in some ways, but of folks watching that too. Again, this was a taste of Ratcliffe with Mueller. Take a look.
Respectfully, Director, you didn't follow the special counsel regulations. Respectfully, by doing that, you managed to violate every principle and the most sacred of traditions about prosecutors not offering extra prosecutorial analysis. I agree with the chairman this morning when he said Donald Trump is not above the law. He's not. But he damn sure shouldn't be below the law, which is where Volume 2 of this report puts him.
David Jolly, a lot of critics looking at that said, A, that amounted to an audition for disappointment from Donald Trump, and B, called into question the kind of loyalty, perhaps, that he had to Trump, and maybe separate from the independence he would need for this.
Yeah,
this
but I don't
position.
think that's what sank him. I served with John Ratcliffe. I think he's a capable person. He can run an organization. Frankly, you could have had Lindsey Graham in exactly that moment, and Lindsey Graham would have said exactly that same thing. I don't think it's the partisanship nor the inexperience that sank this nomination. Donald Trump thrives in that environment. Inexperienced, partisan loyalist, right? This is about lying on your resume. And kudos to those in the media, Pete Williams here, Ken Delanian, I know peers at other media platforms as well. The notion that Ratcliffe said to the nation he had prosecuted terrorists, and when asked to clarify that, it turns out that the evidence is just that he investigated juror misconduct in a terrorism trial. The dynamic here in Washington, Paul knows very well. Congress is out on recess. There is 5 weeks for this story to simmer. And the one thing that the administration and Ratcliffe could not defend in a confirmation hearing is a DNI prospect who lied about prosecuting terrorists. We will know based on whether or not his bio gets corrected even after he's withdrawn from the DNI nomination.
Yeah, we put up, this was Ken Delanian's reporting that David's referring to here. Although Ratcliffe's website says he, quote, put terrorists in prison, there is no evidence he ever prosecuted a terrorism case. While he was U.S. Attorney in East Texas, Ratcliffe was appointed as a special prosecutor in a terrorism funding case in Dallas, in which a Muslim charity was found guilty of funneling money to a Palestinian terror group, but Ratcliffe's name does not appear in the Holy Land trial record. Oswin, we mentioned the president apparently just in the last few minutes was talking to the press. The question came up about why didn't you vet this? Why didn't you know this? And the president, apparently, we're trying to get tape of this, responded, well, the vetting process to me is the press.
Well, it's sort of par for the course for the Trump administration at this point, over 2 years in, that the vetting process for this administration at the highest levels, even when it comes to the intelligence community, has been a fraught mess. And that's sadly the reality that the president of the United States is not only living with, but actively operating. And when it comes to all the discussions that have occurred over the last few days of, is this guy right and is he even fit for this very important intelligence post, even for something as fundamentally important is this. When it comes to the 45th president of the United States, the top qualification for an audition or a job interview for Trump is fealty to President Donald J. Trump. And Representative Ratcliffe, for whatever else he did or allegedly did, fit that qualification. And then the vetting and the scrambling came after. And again, this is not the first time, absolutely not the first time, that something like this has happened in a bungling, sort of humiliating fashion playing out in public for this president. It's how he does business as leader of the free world.
So I mentioned the president talking with the press there on the South Lawn of the White House just a few minutes ago. And again, we're trying to get the tape turned around to the comments he made about the vetting process. You see, that was him approaching the press just a couple minutes ago. Paul, people are always asking, too, I think the dynamics among Republicans in the Senate about where they draw the line and are willing to say to come up against this administration on something. Do you agree with what David Jolly was saying, that this piece about the terrorism, the claimed terrorism background was the line for them, or would there have been trouble no matter what?
He's right. David's right. That was a very big point. But also, they were replacing a good friend of theirs.
Paul, I'm going to interrupt you because we have the tape, and he is starting. Here we go.
Congressman Ratcliffe was being treated very unfairly. I was reading the press, and I think I am a student of the press. And I could see that the press was treating him, I thought, very unfairly. He's an outstanding man. And I asked him, I said, do you want to go through this for 2 or 3 months, or would you want me to maybe do something else? And he thought about it. I said, it's going to be rough. I could see exactly where the press is going. And fake news. He's a fine man. He's a fine man. And so we hadn't started the process, and I thought it's easier before we start. But I read things that were just unfair. And he's just too good. He doesn't deserve it. Little what?
Sue Gordon as acting.
Well, that might be. I like Sue Gordon. And Sue Gordon is there now, and I like her very much. I've always liked Sue Gordon. It could be. Yeah, it could be. We'll make another choice, and Sue will be, she's there now, and certainly she will be considered for the acting, and that could happen. We'll probably be talking about it either later today or next week. You like Sue Gordon? No, I think he was just treated very badly, very harshly by the press. And he really had a decision to make. You want to go through this for, it could be months. And I said, I think I see exactly what they're trying to do. Nobody understands the press, but I think I understand them as well as anybody. And I didn't think it was fair. No, they didn't. I think he would have had support. But again, we were very early in the process. We hadn't even started. So we were very early in the process. And I think he would have had good support, certainly from the Republicans.
They seem pretty silly.
You what?
They were pretty silly at first.
I haven't seen that. I can tell you the Democrats were chilly. That's for sure. But the Republicans, I think, would have been very good. But a lot of the Republicans didn't know John. But I think he would have had good receptivity, and he was getting that. But I believe he made the right decision. You understand? Well, no, you vet for me. I like when you vet. No, you vet. I think the White House has a great vetting process. You vet for me. When I give a name, I give it out to the press, and you vet for me. A lot of times you do a very good job, not always. I think if you look at it, I mean, if you take a look at it, the vetting process for the White House is very good. But you're part of the vetting process, you know? I give out a name to the press, and they vet for me. We save a lot of money that way. But in the case of John, I really believe that he was being treated very harshly and very unfairly.
Republicans did express concern about
Okay, there it was again, just a few minutes ago. Took us a few seconds on the tape, but that was the president. You can see continuing there talking to the press. This just after announcing on Twitter the withdrawal of his nominee to be Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe. Ryan Costello, let me just ask you, you heard him at the end there saying what we were paraphrasing a minute ago, essentially the press is part of the vetting process to him. That's how he's explaining apparently not knowing about some of these controversies involving Ratcliffe. The president blowing that off as no big deal to Republicans in Washington, Republicans in Congress. How do they feel about the vetting process right now?
Well, I think that the point Paul was making a little earlier, had it proceeded to a Senate confirmation process the next 5 weeks and what may or may not have been unearthed, who knows where it would have headed. So it was probably the right decision. It was somewhat entertaining. I was waiting for him to say, you guys are savages or something along that nature. But you save him money is what he also says.
Paul, just in terms of also what the president said there, he raised a point you had mentioned earlier. He said a lot of these Republicans in the Senate, he was saying, didn't know John Ratcliffe. He says they would have warmed up. But what was your sense of that?
He would have been replacing their close friend, Dan Coats, former Republican senator, who they were very, very comfortable with, felt like Coats was a straight shooter. And then you give them somebody that they don't know at all, whose background gets a little bit shaky. Maybe he inflated his resume. And this is, to them, another Mick Mulvaney pick. Mick Mulvaney is the acting White House chief of staff now for 8 months. And he's pulling in one of his guys from the old House GOP caucus for a really sensitive job. Mulvaney has done this a few times with other House members that he's tried to throw into important jobs. And there have been, this is at least the third one that has kind of blown up with egg on his face. So I think and Mulvaney, there is no love lost for him in the Senate Republican conference. So those things all added up to what was really going to be a tough confirmation.
Frank Figliuzzi, you also heard the question there coming up of what's next? Who, if not Ratcliffe, who? The name Sue Gordon. Where do you think this goes from here? Do you have any sense? And what would be a good place for this to go now?
Well, we saw today, just in this clip, the president, I think, starting to change his tune and perhaps soften on Sue Gordon. We actually heard him say he likes Sue Gordon, and that's contrary to some of the reporting that we've been hearing. So perhaps people are getting to him and saying, look, this requires a professional. This requires an experience. And so we might actually see him keep Sue Gordon in place as acting. We'll see. It seems to me the wheels are spinning. He's trying to figure this out. He can't take another blow on a bad vetting process publicly and pick an acting who's got problems. So it might be smart for Sue Gordon. With regard to the permanent position, I hope, I can say this with clarity, I hope we're not going to see yet another acting in a very senior, essential position. This is going to require someone to fill this position on a permanent basis who has the talent. So let's hope at least that we see people influencing this president to get someone with deep experience in the position.
Okay.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.